This is Robert Faust. This is a presentation that is information dense. To study individual slides, just stop the video and then move on after you're finished reading it. This is a summary of many years of experience testing and working with humic acid back in the days where we didn't have any idea how or why it was working. And it was not recognized or taken seriously in this country for that reason. Times have changed. It's a very popular subject of research all over the world, and we know through the science of molecular biology that it works in a unique way, which is on a molecular level, switching on and off pathways that provide information. And this more than one thing. In this slide, it shows 800 different potential compounds identified. So there's no such thing as humic acid. It's a combination of different functional groups, with the aromatic functional groups that contain polyphenols and tannins are significant in the growth regulator effects and the plant protection effects. And the bottom line is you get more protein pumping and also just ATP transfers. In other words, basic energy of the cell itself, and increased photosynthesis, also increased chlorophyll content. So it enhances the plant's ability to produce carbohydrates, that is sugars, from photosynthesis. That's one of the most important things with humic substances, humic acids, really aromatic functional groups, or polyphenol groups that give us the results. It's not the mineral content. It's the humic and fulvic acids, the low and high molecular weight compounds. One feeds the soil, fulvic feeds the plant, because it's a low molecular weight. It can be directly absorbed through the leaves and the roots. Making sugars is what it does. And those sugars in excess are excreted through the root. So it's actually adding sugars to the soil around the root zone, and that if mycorrhizal fungi are present, it's going to increase phosphate release. And if it's also in conjunction with azotobacter or other nitrogen-fixing bacteria, it's going to increase some nitrogen fixation. So we want to use specific microorganisms to do that and be able to control that. Adding sugars alone will definitely stimulate microbial activity in the soil and increase organic carbon and have other benefits on root mass and all that. So that's basically like a shot in the arm for the microorganisms, but is not controlled in any way. It's more like throwing a shot of soluble nitrogen on a crop. So it's still it's input based, whereas the humic substances is priming the pump. And what happens is the sugars in the crop residues, and also that's excreted from the root system, add far more sugar than what you normally add, because that might be multiples of what the normal application rate would be. So what we need to consider is it's different types of thinking. It's a fully biological approach when you use humic substances, which including compost and many other things, to increase the sugars in the crop, both initially by bacterial stimulation. In fact, just about anything, any number of things you use on the soil that stimulate microbial activity can be beneficial. There are many, many substances that can be used to feed or as a potential nutrient source for bacteria. The fungal dominance is what we're really looking for. We're really looking for fungal activity. It's far more important than bacterial. And that's what gives us all the soil building properties, increasing organic matter by building mycelia, decomposing lignins, insoluble compounds, releasing nutrients. So it's the fungal approach. Sugars help fungi, definitely, but they can feed the root system that's inoculated with our VAM culture with 8 different VAM species. And that not only protects the root, it consumes this excess nitrogen, produces growth regulators, and releases phosphate and water to the plant. So we're putting the sugar where it needs to be put in that situation. One of the big misconceptions is humic acid. Is it something black? It's always this black liquid. Well, there's many things you can make a black liquid out of. They're not humic acids. Humic acids are, as in the chart above, it's a number of different functional groups. There's 800 different compounds derived from the decomposition of organic matter by specific microorganisms. So what's important there is lignin. It's the precursor raw material for humic acids. And the next thing is, what's the molecular weights? What's the functional groups? Because there's specific functional groups that are responsible for activating molecular pathways that provide the growth regulator effects and also the antiviral and resistant to pathogen effect. All in all, together, they increase the sugar content of the plant by increasing photosynthesis. It's the very basics of plant growth is activated with maybe up to 25% benefit in terms of production of sugars. After all, that just requires sunlight and chlorophyll. And when we activate ATP and power up the plant, we get a lot more sugars, 25% more. So that's feeding the root rhizosphere right where the sugars are needed, right in the rhizosphere, not everywhere in the soil. But when we combine the crop residues, we're adding lots and lots of sugars, huge amounts of sugars in a lot of these crop residues that then go to work helping to build the soil over the fall and winter period of decomposition, creating humic substances. So that's what I'm saying about the idea of priming the pump. So it's not a one-shot deal. And that's the difference. It's more like chemical or commercial agriculture to add sugar to the field instead of letting the plants, giving the plants what they need to produce the sugars that we're looking for, that do stimulate tremendously plant growth and vigor by activating the soil food web. And it's like feeding them, but we want to make that more on a long-term basis. We're really interested in feeding the soil, the rhizosphere, around the root system. And that directly benefits the plant. And then later on in the season, crop residues and the sugar stimulates tremendous microbial activity and then earthworm activity soon afterwards. So it sets up the food chain at the bottom, and then the end point we always see. I've seen it for 50, 60 years, that we'd apply these humates to the soil and we'd get a tremendous earthworm activity by a year or less later. It always impressed the growers We didn't know exactly why, but we knew it was stimulating the soil food web to provide more food for the higher end of the food chain, which is the earthworms and other critters that we observed. So that is very important. We also observed in our first experiments back in '73 that were applied humates in a potato crop, that there was insect damage, obvious Lepidopterus defoliator damage, holes and so forth in the leaves, right to the row of the treated, where there was little, if any, damage whatsoever, and a different color, a blue-green color. So that was intriguing and an unknown effect at that time. But to me, it was something that could, if harnessed, could eliminate the need for pesticides, or at least reduce the need for pesticides. And we also observed over the years less fungal infection and treated it, and better flavor, higher sugars. That was always a factor. And why we got frost resistance and drought resistance and better shelf life. It was all behind sugars, because we know now that humic acids increase photosynthesis. And that's the basic thing, converting sunlight to sugar. So you shouldn't have to buy sugar extracted from another plant to provide sugars for your plant, your growing crop. Like transferring, it may be a useful practice, but you get that as a byproduct when you use humic substances correctly. So the amount of money that you save from, let's say, adding sugar or maybe some other inputs will pay for the humic substances, which will give you a known, benefit over a longer period of time than a kind of a shot in the dark approach. What we're doing now is identifying specific microorganisms, both fungal and bacteria, with the fungal being the most active and easier to work with, more reliable in terms of survivability and benefits. And one of those is the mycorrhizal fungi. It's our VAM product that contains 8 different strains of mycorrhizal fungi, so that they'll work under a whole range of conditions. And also with activator, with the humic acid and the trace elements, along with a growth regulator that helps both the fungal get it established as well as activate the plant's root system. So once established, mycorrhizal fungi will release a great deal of bound phosphates in the soil and can make a very, very big difference. And also they have vesicles that hold water, so in a dry season it helps keep the plant, their host, alive, because the plant is pumping sugars down, excess sugars out of the root system, and the mycorrhizal fungi is feeding on it. And these are the crucial organisms we're looking for. And then when the crop residue and all that residual sugar being excreted by the root system turns into very, very large amounts, when the crop residues are incorporated. Just think about the amount of sugars in a whole crop residue of a cornfield, like corn leaves being very sweet, lots of sugars. Well, most of these crops are going to produce more sugars, and that's going to be in the crop residue, and as well as the soil from the excretion from the roots. So we're targeting. And in the case of certain bacteria that we add that are known, nitrogen fixers or biostimulants under different conditions, this kind of science is really developing. And BioAG has microbiology division and is producing a lot of these compounds, including fungi that produce volatile organic compounds in the soil and in the root zone that have tremendous stimulation of crop growth and quality and uptake on an amazing level. So instead of a shotgun approach, we're working with specific organisms of the correct strain that gets the job done, and stimulating the plant to produce sugars in excess. That's why we get such sweet fruit. That's why sugar-loving plants respond so much, like citrus, apples, sugar beets.
Okay, here we are. Where we used dry humate pre-plant, quite a bit of it, spread out here pre-plant. So here's the rye. You can see here's my stick. So this was put on here last year, showing the long-term carryover benefit of humic substances. And then here's where we didn't put it. So which crop would you have? Which would you rather do? Of course, we'll see a big, gigantic difference when the yield at harvest. But okay, let me just walk over. Here's without humate. We're not worried about organic matter, just chemical fertilizers, salts. We're good. You know, that's the mentality. Okay, so here's large applications, optimum application of humic, full humics. That's humic, fulvic, the whole spectrum right here. Here's without, here's with. So, if you don't believe your own eyes, well, there's nothing I can do. So this shows the extent of the field here of rye, but I'm going to compare this field, which was used humates, humic acid, VAM, BioAG products, and BioAG management for the last few years, and we're going to go over to the field over on the other side of the road, which had none of that, and it was planted with rye the same day. Here we can see the difference. So here's my indicator stick. You can see the thickness of the rye, and it extends, you know, pretty uniformly in this particular test plot. But you can see the leaf width. That's the key. In grain and barley and corn, you'll see a wider leaf blade in response to humic substances. Also, you'll see a cleaner leaf. Now here's where they damaged the leaf with herbicide spray. You can see the burn, because they insisted on spraying this unnecessarily. Okay, so here we are in another part of the field, and this is the untreated, without the mycorrhizal, without the full power fulvic on rye. Same day. So we walk over here. Okay, here's the untreated. Boom. Here we are in the treated. And you can see a difference in color. Bigger on the rye. There's a spray plane going over, delivering rescue chemistry to farmers who did not use humic substances. You notice we have no insect damage or any fungal diseases here. That airplane that just flew by, he's going out to spray fungicides because they play crop rescue chemistry here. Humic substances tends to provide not only resistance to plants, but also to humans. Here we are in the Faust BioAG farm This is a crop of rye, biologically grown rye, using Cyto Plus foliar and VAM. You can see the size of the field.
And I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall. This is about 6 feet tall where we sprayed.
It's a good 6 feet tall where we sprayed, yeah.
And then further down this way, it goes down a little bit. Shorter.
Here it's much shorter.
Thinner stalks.
Yeah, thinner stalk. And you can see the beginnings of lodging, where it's kind of falling and tangling a little bit. The heads aren't as big, the grain is smaller. Oh yeah, the heads are definitely smaller. Go over there and grab a head and we'll compare the heads.
I'm gonna make a couple of heads from here.
Yeah.
And then the head from there.
So yeah, this was ground had humate supplied and coming off of a vetch cover crop. So here's the difference. It's not just the height. You don't get paid for that. It's the number of grains per head and the size of the head, and you can see a big difference. Big difference. Yeah, there's your treated.
There's a difference too.
In height.
It's non-treated.
Height and size of the stem itself. That's with, that's without. So yeah, it's a difference between like losing money and maybe making money on your crop.
Yeah.
People ask, what makes your humic substance products at BioAG different or better? And it's a complex story. I mean, this includes, first of all, finding the most potent sources of raw materials. Since we're not miners, we're not tied to one source of supply. So after investigating essentially every area of where humates occur in the western U.S., as many as 12 different samples, determined by plant testing and other testing which were the best. Let the plants tell us. And greenhouse experiments. Once we determine what's the best humates, then we have a one-step activation process that does not turn it into a liquid and then dry it with heat, which destroys a lot of its benefits. Ours, nothing is added and nothing is removed. It's activated in a one-step process from a dry insoluble to a dry soluble, which is still going to contain about 15 or 20% sediment, which is called HUMIN, which is still beneficial to the soil, but it can be settled out of the solution and applied, mixed with some other materials if you'd like. So there's a small amount of sediment that is also useful. Now you have something you can spray, add in soil application, planter application, etc. The dry soluble powder or granular can be mixed with dry fertilizer materials, either organic or even lime, gypsum, and also like dried poultry waste and other organics. It's very advisable to apply it with phosphate rock, lime, gypsum, and any other soil amendments that you may be adding. And it's used at a relatively small amount per acre, in the range of 10 to 50 pounds per acre, depending on the situation and the frequency of application. But there's no other humic substance product made like full humics by BioAG. it's totally different process. Most of the dry solubles and granulars come from China, where they make a liquid with caustic soda.
Okay, here we are where we used dry humate pre-plant, quite a bit of it, spread out here pre-plant. So here's the rye. You can see here's my stick. So this was put on here last year, showing the long-term carryover benefit of humic substances. And then here's where we didn't put it. So which crop would you have? Which would you rather do? Of course, we'll see a big, gigantic difference when the yield at harvest. But okay, let me just walk over. Here's without humate. We're not worried about organic matter, just chemical fertilizers, salts. We're good. You know, that's the mentality. Okay, so here's large applications, optimum application of humic, full humics. That's humic, fulvic, the whole spectrum right here. Here's without, here's with. So, if you don't believe your own eyes, well, there's nothing I can do. So this shows the extent of the field here of rye, but I'm going to compare this field, which was used humates, humic acid, VAM, BioAG products, and BioAG management for the last few years, and we're gonna go over to the field over on the other side of the road, which had none of that, and it was planted with rye the same day. Here we can see the difference. So here's my indicator stick. You can see the thickness of the rye, and it extends, you know, pretty uniformly in this particular test plot. But you can see the leaf width. That's the key. In grain and barley and corn, you'll see a wider leaf blade in response to humic substances. Also, you'll see a cleaner leaf. Now here's where they damaged the leaf with herbicide spray. You can see the burn, because they insisted on spraying this unnecessarily. Okay, so here we are in another part of the field, and this is the untreated, without the mycorrhizal, without the full power fulvic on rye. Same day. So we walk over here. Okay, here's the untreated. Boom. Here we are in the treated. Now you can see a difference in color. Bigger. There's a spray plane going over, delivering rescue chemistry to farmers who did not use humic substances. You notice we have no insect damage or any fungal diseases here. That airplane that just flew by, he's going out to spray fungicides because they play crop rescue chemistry here. Humic substances tends to provide not only resistance to plants, but also to humans. Here we are in the Faust BioAG farm. This is a crop of rye, biologically grown rye, using Cyto Plus foliar and VAM. You can see the size of the field.
And I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall. This is about 6 feet tall where we sprayed.
It's a good 6 feet tall where we sprayed, yeah.
And then further down this way, it goes down a little bit. Shorter.
Here it's much shorter.
Thinner stalks.
Yeah, thinner stalk. And you can see the beginnings of lodging, where it's kind of falling and tangling a little bit.
The heads aren't as big, the grain is smaller. Oh yeah, the heads are definitely smaller. Go over there and grab a head and we'll compare the heads.
I'm gonna make a couple of heads so from here.
Yeah.
And then the head from there.
So yeah, this was ground had humate supplied and coming off of a vetch cover crop. So here's the difference. It's not just the height. You don't get paid for that. It's the number of grains per head and the size of the head, and you can see a big difference. Big difference. Yeah, there's your treated.
There's a difference too.
In height.
It's non-treated.
Height and size of the stem itself. That's with, that's without. So yeah, it's a difference between like losing money and maybe making money on your crop.
Yeah.
Recent analysis of world soil resources indicated maybe no more than 40 to 60 crops remain based on the soil loss and degradation of the soil. But there are so many other factors also that are crop limiting factors. Of course, the soil complete loss and oxidation of organic matter and runoff is obviously really a serious scenario by itself. It would be the end of civilization based on that. So the way to keep it going is what's been done since ancient times, and that's a flow of organic matter, either by slash and burn, a couple crops and then 20 years of bush, using agroforestry techniques where leaves and from nitrogen fixing trees are used for the row crops planted between alleys of trees, and biodynamic farming techniques where you have mixed farming and use of manure and compost and cover crops, rotation, legumes. That's a sustainable method. And so if nowadays with large-scale crop production of one crop, monoculture, it's a severe problem. And it's a difficult situation in terms of cycling organic matter, but it can be done. And that's managing the decay systems of the crop residues correctly and the use of humic substances in a liquid or dry form, being that a kilogram of full humic, which is a soluble humic, activated humic powder, over 50% humic acids, high level fulvic acid and humic acid, that would be equal to 10 to 12 tons of compost in terms of humic acid, not in terms of total nutrients. So that's the main point, is to keep feeding the soil, feed the microbes, recycle the organic matter, and use fungal dominance, fungal biomass, as a way of increasing organic matter and sugars. Because mushrooms produce mannose, they produce a special kind of sugar, and that has a stimulating effect on the whole soil food web, and especially the fungi. And the fungi are what produces the mycelial mat in the soil that eliminates a lot of insect problems. It provides a source of food for earthworms. It's just in general why it would take all those years to get back from a couple years of row cropping to get the microbial the fungal dominance back. And so the only way you can do it on a very, very large scale, or even a fairly small scale, if you don't have livestock, if you can't buy compost, or you don't have any livestock, it would be to strip leaves off of trees. But that's basically what humates are to begin with. There's nothing more than lignocellulosic materials of hardwood species, leaves, branches, bark, all that, that form deposits after flooding, some kind of flood event, and got covered with sandstone or some other overburden, and essentially composted down like 20 or 30 feet of material down to like a foot or two over a period of 18,000 years. And in some cases, go back to earlier flood cycles, 4.5 million years. So it's nothing more than fossil compost, which we then activate, but it's very concentrated, though, however, as opposed to, say, compost. So that's pretty much the answer. That and silicates and controlling the pH of the soil, either with lime or acidic products that contain, sulfur containing, along with the microbes necessary to oxidize the sulfur into sulfuric acid. So that's it. I mean, pH control, organic matter cycling, decay system management, and adequate humic substances to maintain fungal dominance. And that's what we have been working on for quite a few years, and what Faust BioAG services can provide. And we have a unique method of producing our product. It's a one-step process, dry insoluble to dry soluble, making it economical and preserves everything that's in it, including the minerals. Nothing's taken out and nothing's added. So go to the website, subscribe to our channel, and that'll help spread the word. This is Robert Faust signing off.